Hi, this is Pete Shearer, and welcome to my second Dimecast, introducing you to Objective-C and iOS. We have open Xcode 5.1 here, and we're going to create a new Xcode project. And this time, what I want to do is create an application that starts off with a table view and shows you a little bit of detail, and then when you click an individual cell, it takes you to a detail screen to show you a little bit more. So we're going to get a little deeper into the internals in iOS, in Objective-C, some more of the syntax, and then look a lot more at how storyboards work and how they interact. So I'm going to start off with a master detail application. I considered starting from scratch on this, but I'd like to maybe start a little slower, and the master detail application is 90% of what we want. So I'm going to select that and click next. Again, for product name this time, it's going to be, we're going to call this one Dr. Dimecasts. You'll see why in a minute. Organization name, my name, company identifier, net.dimecast, prefix, DCN. And again, we're still not going to use core data. Click next. We'll pick the spot for this, and I'll select here, create. Okay. If we look at our storyboard right away, it's already a little bit different. So you'll notice, first of all, we have a navigation controller, and that's where this arrow points, so it's leading in with the navigation controller, which this table view controller is wrapped inside this navigation view controller. And then there's a segue. That's what this arrow means here between the master and the detail. Every time you want to move from one view controller to another view controller, you have to create a segue. And this one gives it to us because they understand what we're trying to do. If you select this segue, you see it's been given a name of show detail. We're going to use that a little bit later. For this prototype cell, whenever it makes a cell on this table view, it's going to make it to look exactly like this one. And we can create our own, or we can use one that's built in. I'm just going to use one that's built in. Over here in table view cell in the attributes inspector, I'm going to change that to subtitle so that it looks like this. Alright, now if I click here, the master view controller, so we make sure we've got that selected, and I look over here in the identity inspector, you can see that this view controller is operating as a custom class. It's already been defined as this DCN master view controller. They've namespaced it as we asked. And the detail view controller is the DCN detail view controller. So if we want to see how they work, we have to come look inside their code. Now we're going to start to use the H and the M file, the headers and the module files. So first thing we're going to notice is that the master view controller inherits from UI table view controller. And here's a handy trick. If you hold down command and hover on something and click it, it will show you its definition within the framework. And you see that UI table view controller is nothing more than a UI view controller that inherits the two delegates, the UI table view delegate and the UI table view data source that you need in order to work with a table. So for this view controller to be the data source for a table view and the delegate to handle the events, you have to inherit these. So it just does that for you. It also already wraps a table view, which is tied to the one that's on the screen. So that one's all set for us. If we look at the M file, they've done a lot of work for us. First thing they did is, you'll notice this master view controller imports its own header file, but it also imports the header file for the detail view controller because we're going to need to access it later. The header file is showing you on a class what is publicly available to you, what has been exposed for us to access. So that way when I call detail view controller, when I instantiate one, I know about it, I know about its properties and methods, all because of this import statement. And we're going to add one or two more as well. It's all standard through here. We're actually going to get rid of this. It's adding a navigation, an edit, an add button. We don't want that. We're not going to add any items to our table view. It's adding a little bit of complexity. And because nothing's going on this wake from nib, it's just calling super, we're going to get rid of that. Did receive memory warning, just to clean this up a little bit. Usually you'd want to add some code in here, some things you might want to clean up. You're disposing of resources. We're not going to do that. Insert new object, as I said, we're not doing that. Number of sections in table view. This is one of the things, this pragma mark is something people often do to indicate regions where they're implementing specific parts of interfaces, basically, of header files. One of them is number of sections in TableView. If you're familiar with iOS and some of the different settings applications, you might have a setting for general and a setting grouping for sounds, something like that. In this case, we only have one section, and that's the one we're working with. Quite often, unless you're creating static table views, so that you can just use a table view as a layout, you're almost always going to return one here. Number of rows in section. This objects array at the top is going to represent our objects. So the number of rows are how many objects are in that array. It's doing objects.count. Remember, this dot is just syntactic sugar. It's really just passing the count message to objects. What that means is, normally in an object-oriented language, if this underscore objects was nil and you called .count, you might get some kind of object reference error. That doesn't happen here because we're just passing a message to nil and it will not respond, so you get nothing. In this case, we get 0 because it's expecting an integer. Personally, I like to do that explicitly, so it's very, very obvious when I'm looking through code that I'm passing a message to objects. Can edit row. We're not doing editing. Edit style. We don't want to do that. We don't want to move the row or can move row, so we can clean this up as well. And let's prepare for segue. We'll look at this a little bit more later. One of the things I want to do right away is we need data for this application. So I'm going to paste in here some code that I've prepared prior to the episode. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new file, and we're going to call the file DCN episode. And instead of subclassing UI view controller, it's just going to subclass NS object. I'm going to choose to save it here among the other files and hit create. So you'll see it gives us the header file and the M file right away. And the M file automatically imports the H file. Now for the H file, I'm going to paste in the properties now. Okay, so what I've done is declare some public properties just with the @property keyword. Non-atomic and strong. So non-atomic means that it is not thread safe, but we don't care so much on the phone. If you were developing a Mac app, you probably come up with atomic. This is convention and almost automatic for everything you're doing on the phone. Strong, so we want to retain. We are the owners of this property, so we want to make sure that it sticks around as long as the object does. And then all 5 of my properties are strings, and I've just called them episode title, writer name, doctor name, episode number, and synopsis. So this is going to be an object that represents Doctor Who episodes and some of my favorites of all time. Well, not all time, since the reboot, let's say that. Also, I want to create something called it DCN episode repository. Still NS object. Still going to save it alongside. In this case, I'm going to just go right in the M file to start. In the implementation, again, I'm going to paste in something pre-prepared. You'll notice right away I've got a bunch of errors. It's because I'm referencing that DCN episode, but I have not imported the header. So this code file doesn't know about that. It's a very common thing that's going to happen. So I can come in here, import DCN episode.h, and now it's much happier. You'll see what we're doing is I've created this plus. It's a class level method. It is kind of like a static method in C# or Java, which means that I'm not going to have to instantiate DCN episode repository in order for it to return the list. It's going to return an array, which is a pointer. It's the C heritage here. And so the first thing I do, it doesn't take any parameters. First thing I'm going to do is declare a mutable array, one I can change. It's called episodes. I'm going to alloc init, which just news it up. And then I just go through and I define all of the episodes. I've got 6 episodes here defined. And now the last thing we do is, because we want to call this, I'm going to just copy this signature and go up to the header file and paste it in. So now anyone that's using the episode repository knows about that method. So now it's time to come back to our master view controller. The first thing I'm going to do is this objects. In this case, it declared a mutable array because its original intention was to change it with adds and edits. I'm going to change this declaration a little bit, so we're very explicit about what we're doing. I'm going to make this @property, just like the other one. Non-atomic, strong, because I want to make sure we hold on to this table view among everything we're doing. And instead of mutable array, I'm going to make it an array. Once we set it, I don't want to change it. So in view did load, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, import our DCN episode repository H file, and we're also going to import for the episode so that we understand what an episode is. I did forget one thing. As this is declared this way, I should actually have the pointer indicator there. Oh, this will get me every time. So if I want this to be existing, they're using the convention of having these braces in here. You don't need them unless you tend things to really stay private to the controller. I didn't need those braces. I declared the property here, and that's what it was angry about. So now in view did load, I'm going to set those objects equal to our DCN episode repository get episode list. So we called that static method. By declaring it not at property before, they went ahead and added that underscore immediately themselves. When I do property, it's automatically going to underscore it. So I'm going to take that out as well. Lastly, when the view loads, I'm going to call self.TableView reload data. I'm going to force it to call the number of sections, call the self a row. I'm going to just force it to act. So the last thing we have to do in here in order to see something is I'm going to change this. So in self a row at index path, so what's happening is it's trying to create a cell at a certain index. It knows how many there are, and it's just iterating through. In this case, there's 6. So it says, okay, at the first one, at the second one, at the third one, what am I going to show? So step 1, in order to save memory, if we look over at the storyboard, there's going to be a list of cells here. And as I scroll up, cells are going to go off the screen and new ones are going to appear to show up from the bottom. So depending on how big you make your cells, and this one we're actually going to make this a little bigger. Depending on how big you make your cells, you can only fit so many on the screen at a time. The ones that are off screen, you don't need them, so you don't need to keep the memory. So what this is doing is, when it dequeues the cell, if there's a cell available that has gone off screen, it's going to reuse that cell rather than allocate new memory. So we know the index path. So you see what it's doing here is it's going to my object array, and it's passing the index path.row. So what row are we on? We're on row 0, row 1, which matches nicely with pulling objects out of an array. I'm going to just change this from what we got for free. So there, we're going to declare of type DCN episode, and then cells text label. So that's the big label in the version we created. We're going to say episode title. The detailed text label is that little tiny one underneath, and we're going to just set that episode number. So step 1, let's take a look. If we build and run, you see the episodes show up. They won't have, nothing will happen when I click on it right now. So for now, we're going to close this out. Okay, we've reached a point where I'm going to stop this episode here with our master views table view populating with data. Next time, we'll implement the segue and the detail view controller. Until then.